Joined DOMO about 6 months ago. I've been on the publishing side for the last 5 years at Time Inc., Hearst, and Univision. Before that, I was on the agency side at MediaVest and Cadreon. And the constant theme throughout my career has always been analytics. How do I take the numbers that come out of all of these systems, pull them all together, and optimize the media that's running, whether it's for an advertiser or on behalf of a publisher to get revenue? And if you think about it, there are all these different data sources, each with completely disparate goals. What you do on social media is typically different than what you're doing on banner display, which is different than what you're doing on television. And the way that we talk about it, the way that we act upon it, the way that agencies purchase the media, the way that publishers sell the media is so just out there and randomized that it makes it really difficult to turn into something cohesive and to build a story upon it. And that's what we do at DOMO. I'm not going to go into a really large pitch or anything about what we do, but I think it is important to just discuss the way that data is managed overall in the industry. So if you think about this, at all of your companies, there's probably an analyst doing this, most likely manually. Connecting is just grabbing the data, logging into the ad servers, logging into the DSPs, logging into Nielsen, wherever it might be, getting the data from all these sources and pulling it into an Excel spreadsheet. That's the preparation stage. They try and figure out how it goes from one system, consolidated into another system, so that people can make decisions. The visualization aspect is really just saying, how do I like to see it on a regular basis? And then the engagement in most companies happens by email or in a meeting. So then you get to optimization. And the optimization only comes when you have data that's granular enough. Typically, it happens at 2 levels. You have the management layer, which is looking at it top down. So think about it from your perspective. How often have you seen an Excel spreadsheet with a different tab? One tab for social, one tab for display, one tab for mobile, one tab for TV, keep going, all that stuff. And you as the executive have to make the optimization decision quarterly, annually, however often it is. Where am I going to put my budget? And then at the granular level, each of the teams running these groups, each of the individual campaigns, line items, they want to optimize as well. This is really, much easier done in digital means. You're talking about DSPs that are optimizing on an impression by impression basis, but this also happens with direct deals with TV stations that you're purchasing on. Anything that you do from a marketing perspective, digital or not, you have the opportunity to optimize. So the question is, how do we actually take all of the data together, combine it to just make this a lot easier? So let's take a step back. Let's figure out, what are we trying to actually accomplish? There's the targeting element, and then there's the measurement element when it comes to data. And let's kind of key in on the measurement aspect of it. Your 5-year-old comes up to you and says, I want to sell lemonade. It's a bright, sunny day. You're no longer in the middle of winter. It's June day. And you help them put together a lemonade stand right in front of your house. You get all the lemons that you need, all the sugar, all the water, put it all together, and then they start selling. And you realize there are about 2 cars an hour coming by and purchasing lemonade. And your kid, who's 5, who's probably already much smarter than you, says, hey, why don't we put a sign at the end of the street? Let's get more people coming over here. We need to sell more lemonade. So you put up the sign, and all of a sudden you go from 2 cars an hour to 8 cars an hour. That attribution's pretty easy. You know that the second sign got 6 more cars. Pretty simple. So then you decide, let's put up 2 more signs. The entry into that road has 2 different other roads, one on the east side, one on the west side. Let's put other signs in to get people there. All of a sudden you go from 8 cars an hour to 15. Really simple example, but the attribution's not even that easy. All of a sudden you start realizing you can't figure it out because you don't know where they initially came from. You don't know who is going to come by naturally. You don't know which sign they saw first. And if you are an ad server, all attribution goes to the sign right at the end of your street because that was the last touch, which doesn't make sense either. So when we start thinking about how do we figure out how to attribute it, what are the questions that need to be asked? And this is now where we're talking about the top-down view of saying, what are the questions I have? What's the data that's available to me? So in this case, it's actually pretty easy. You ask each driver that comes by, each person who buys some lemonade, where are they starting and where are they going? This is actually fairly easy data to get on the internet. You know what website they come from, you know where they're going. Now, here's the thing that's actually really interesting when you talk about databases at most companies. And I'm sure none of you have heard this before, but there are companies out there and there are teams out there who will say, we have so much data. Let's gather up all the data. Let's spend the next 2 years, 18 months, 24 months, and hire a big data engineering staff and gather all the data into a data lake. Nobody's heard the term data lake, I assume, right? So the data lake gets built, that team's, or partially built, that team's probably gone on to their next job because they get paid more money elsewhere, and data scientists turn over fairly frequently. And that data lake that you were supposed to be able to analyze and the data was supposed to tell you something just kind of sits there in perpetuity, and you're paying storage fees, you're paying new engineers to come in and learn about all the code that was built, about all the ETL processes that were happening there. And that's when we start thinking, okay, why don't we think about the business questions and figure out what do we need in order to gather that? And that's where it's really important to think about data in two different methodologies. And this goes back to, I think, what was said on the last panel, which was addressable targeting, which also should go over to addressable reporting, in my mind. So majority of companies out there, when they talk about data lakes, they're pulling in data that is almost thinking about at the line item level. They're thinking about at the campaign level. Most of the reporting you get from an ad server, from your DSP, even from your DMP, tends to be aggregated. It's by campaign, it's by product, it's by line item that you have. And stitching that together is really good and very powerful. And I don't mean to knock it, but it has its purpose. And if we want to get to a truly addressable media environment, you have to think about it from the other side. Start thinking about the people and not the line items. So what does that mean? You have the DMPs, which have cookies of all these people. You have your CRM database, sometimes matched, anonymized in some way. You have all these other systems that you could plug into to get data on these people and figure out where are they coming from and where are they going. And we have to stitch that together. So, show of hands who saw the Super Bowl? A lot of people, right? How to prove that Super Bowl ads work. And this is probably one of the biggest questions that happens around this time in the industry, and it takes weeks to find out if your ad worked. Now, I have a few on here that were my favorites, but we don't know if they work yet. So the first question that's always asked with an advertisement, especially on television, is who saw it? Super Bowl is actually not the hardest problem, but not the easiest problem. When you don't have addressable television, you have 100 million or so people watching the Super Bowl. You don't know exactly who they are. They're not watching on their devices. You don't always know exactly which households. And maybe you do know which households, but people are going over to each other's houses so often, there's no pass-along formula. So in a perfect environment, and what you get in digital in many cases, is you can figure out the individual who saw it. But with television, what if we could become more predictive? And that's the part that gets really interesting. You're no longer thinking about the reactive analytics that come out of a system, but you're getting into predictive analytics. And the thing that I would pitch here or recommend, which is not so much a product, but a way to think about it, is it's very easy to get a huge CRM list of everybody in the US. It's very easy to understand who all these people are. And then it's actually not that hard to then connect that to another layer of some sort of insight or action. And I bet based off of 1 or 2 data points, you could predict with a very high level of certainty who watched the Super Bowl. Not based on their devices, not based on where they're located, not based on whose house they visited, but based on maybe some social media. Do they follow a team? Have they tweeted about a team? Have they had a geolocation aspect in the past that shows them at a sports bar on a Sunday? Or do you have TV information from them going back where they are looking at scores on their iPad or addressable TV on their phone or on the Roku or whatever it might be? Take all that historical data, and now you can be very predictive about the Super Bowl. And now you're no longer thinking about the Super Bowl as a line item, but you're thinking about the group of individuals that you want to target, and hopefully the Super Bowl audience is in there. This is actually done really well. I know a company in the movie space. They do this incredibly well. They have a list of every individual. They track them on social media. Many other advertising and content, all these websites are tracking them as much as they can, and they know exactly, with some high level of certainty, who's interested in horror movies, and that's who they advertise to. And then they create the line items around that. So just thinking about that, I'll go into a quick example of a client of ours, MasterCard, that thinks about things, in this case, from two perspectives. They do look at it first. They had to solve the problem of the high level, the campaign level. This is the global marketing team at MasterCard, and they assist every team in every other country. So they had to think about it first. How do we get all the campaign level information from all these sources? They must do a ton of marketing on Facebook and Twitter and Google and all of these international companies, as well as a ton of local companies. So they had to aggregate everything together to get to the campaign analytics that they need to do the high level optimization. But MasterCard also has really strong data at the individual level. They have purchase level data. They know who has a credit card. They're looking at that database as well, and they know customer value that they can use for themselves and for their clients as well. Incredibly powerful data, basically the exact same data, just flipped sideways. The rows become the columns. So I'll kind of leave you with this note where the big data side is incredibly important. You want to make better decisions, but it's really important to think about it from the high-level questions you want to get into, the granular optimizations that you want to take on a day-to-day basis, and really figure out what the analytics should look like. What are the data sources that you want to pull from in order to create these? And it could be that the same data source might actually provide the data in multiple ways. And that's one of the things that I would say, just based on my past experience, not even the stuff I necessarily do right now, but just based on past experience, has been incredibly difficult. You look at the way the systems are organized, just going back to what was said previously around what we need to change from an addressable perspective, what we need to change from a targeting perspective and an attribution perspective. It is not that easily stitched at this moment, I think, in the industry. And I think as each individual brand, each individual agency looks at it, when they start thinking about it from two perspectives, the people leading to the campaigns, back to the people, all of a sudden you'll understand that it really becomes much easier to ask for the right data sets from each of these platforms to pull together, to visualize, and to make hopefully smart optimizations. Any questions?
Can you go back to the MasterCard slide?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you say it again? What'd you do?
So MasterCard started at they were thinking about it at a global level. So they had the global team, and then they have each individual localized team. And each team at the start of it was probably doing everything in Excel, but they didn't understand going into it how everything connected together. They didn't know how each individual team spend in a specific platform, even though it might be the exact same platform across countries, combined together to actually get to real results. So they thought about it at the high level of, let's use one system to integrate all these different data sources. They had 20 plus social media accounts included from all the international accounts pretty much, pulling it all together. Each one had different marketing spend. It's not like, until it got to the CMO, he's the only one who got to see it at the high level. So he was looking at Excel spreadsheets from everywhere. So pulling that all together, you could actually say, this is how we're spending money across everything. That was the campaign level view. And then they got to the individual view as well. So all of the same data sets, while they looked at it aggregated from the campaign level, they went back and also got it at the individual level, which was incredibly important. So, and this is really getting to more of their CRM type data and figuring how does the spending occur. They don't care about necessarily spending by campaign, they care about it by individual, so they can go back to the campaign level.
Could you talk a little bit about what kind of data models and tools you have for publishers who are interested in understanding the nature of their customers and how that's changing?
Yeah, absolutely. So, this is basically what I did at my last few jobs. The question was, in case you couldn't hear it, on the publisher side, how can we use tools and models to better understand the visitation and the way people interact with the publishers? So, again, I think it comes down to those two different aspects. At the very high level, you want to understand from a sales perspective, how are all the advertising campaigns doing? Again, everything is bought at a campaign level, not at an individual level. So you want to be able to optimize across all of them. When you're stitching in the data, you're looking at your, let's take digital, for example, that's the easiest place right now. You have your ad server, and you have everything broken out by line item. If you look at a typical optimization, for programmatic specifically, even just that, if you want to optimize programmatic in the ad server, you first have to log into each individual system, pull all of that information at a hopefully granular level, but really it ends up being a fairly high level, and trying to match it up with your ad server to see what the discrepancies are. So at least what DOMO tries to do, and what I did with them at my last place, was look at pulling the automated data from all of these systems at the most granular level, which was, in this case, the creative level or the line item at the ad server. And then you see discrepancies at each line item. The exact same thing can be done for direct sold campaigns that are at the line item level in the ad server, as well as matched up to the advertiser's ad server. So something that happens manually, typically on a weekly or monthly basis by most ad ops teams, could then be done at hourly. So that's looking at from the advertising perspective. Flipping it on its head, you want to look at the individual perspective. You want to map in all of your Adobe Analytics and Google Analytics data. You want to map in your marketing and consumer marketing side, everything that happens to drive people in. And the question is, can you do the stitching there? The part that gets really interesting is when you start mashing them up together. There are actually, I think it's fairly difficult for most publishers currently to say which audience that visits, because they have multiple audiences when you bring them out, which audience that visits is not necessarily the largest, but the most valuable. I actually think that there's a huge opportunity for publishers to look beyond, stitch the DMP data along with monetization data, which most don't do, and really say, what is the value, which audiences are completely undervalued and which ones are overvalued. So just because you have a sports section, you do get a lot of monetization there, that doesn't necessarily mean it is the most valuable audience, because it could depend on the scale. Cool. Thank you.